Hi, welcome to Big Ideas. I'm Olle. Lisa Wilkinson got the gig as editor of Dolly magazine when she was 21. She was a young woman from Campbelltown in Sydney's western suburbs wearing a yellow novelty jumper and throwing her hat in the ring amongst what she saw as all those other sophisticated Fairfax journalists. She hadn't been to journalism school, possibly an advantage, but she had a great ear and a great eye for a story. She's carved out a successful career in print and now, of course, in television. In this edition of the show, she's giving the annual Andrew Olle address. And guess what? In 20 years, she's only the second woman to do so. Jana Wendt was the first to break that particular glass ceiling. This speech is a bit of a call to arms. Why not? Misogyny and sexism are still there. Lisa's not whinging here, she's just reminding us. It's a good speech.
I'm Richard Glover from 702 ABC Sydney, and I'm your MC for tonight. This is the 18th annual Olle Lecture, an event which seeks to understand the media and the challenges it faces, and to do so in a way that takes inspiration from the career of the late Andrew Olle. He was a friend and colleague to many here, to people like Robin Williams and Mike Carlton who are here, and many others who are here. But to a much larger group in the profession, he was a person who remains fixed in our minds as an image of what good journalism looks like. What would Andrew do, and what would Andrew ask, is still a useful question to pose to yourself when tussling with the day-to-day dilemmas of journalism. We're enormously happy to have friends here from not only the ABC, but from Australia's key media organisations, from Channel 9, from 7 and 10, from News Limited, Fairfax, newer players such as The Guardian Australia, Mamma Mia, Crikey, and so on. And people whose names seem synonymous with the Australian media: Ita Buttrose, Andrew Denton, Tony Jones, Liz Hayes, Sally Sara, Tracy Grimshaw, Laurie Oakes, Annabel Crabb, the list goes on and on. The world of politics is represented tonight at a high level. Welcome to the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, and the New South Wales Premier, Barry O'Farrell, again, among many others. I'd also like to welcome the Chair of the ABC, James Spiegelman, and our Managing Director, Mark Scott, and also Andrew's wife, Annette Olle, and their 3 children, Nick, Sam, and Nina. Your attendance makes this night special, as always. Our speaker this year is Lisa Wilkinson. For more than 2 decades, Lisa has blazed her own trail through the landscape of the Australian media, first in publishing, then in radio, then in television. Of course, for some 6 years, she has, alongside Carl Stefanovic, co-hosted Nine's incredibly successful Today Show, as well as leading that network's coverage of so many major news events. Her success started early. As has been mentioned already, she edited her first magazine titled Dolly at just 21. Next, Kerry Packer threw her the editorship of Clio, basically saying, "See what you can do with this." Well, what she did was make it per capita the highest selling women's lifestyle magazine in the world. She went on to a radio career, working alongside some of the industry's best, including Mike, who's here today. And speaking personally, I've always admired Lisa for her understanding of journalism as an attempt to understand all of life, from the toughest investigative story to something about day-to-day life. We share that view about journalism's task. We also share something else. As you may know, I am the proud holder of the Guinness Book of Records for the world's longest radio interview. A 24-hour interview I conducted with Lisa's husband, the writer Peter Fitzsimons. And so Lisa and I not only understand, we not only share an understanding of the width of journalism, the breadth of journalism, but we also understand, we share a knowledge of Peter. My God, that man can talk. And you know, I boast so often, because it's a Guinness Book of Records, after all, that's pretty rare, so I'm boasting all the time, but I meet people, and I say, you know what, I'm in the Guinness Book, I did the 24-hour interview with Peter Fitzsimons, and everyone I boast to is so utterly unimpressed. They say, "What did you do? Say hello." And there is truth in that, ladies and gentlemen. But enough of him. Lisa's topic today is the impact of social media on journalism. It is something that is affecting everyone in this room, everyone in this industry. We are all, in our own ways, struggling to understand it, make use of it, and yet not be burnt by it. I think it's fair to say we are actually really eager and hungry for wisdom about how to deal with it. So please welcome this year's Olle lecturer, Lisa Wilkinson.
Wow, thank you. And thank you to you, Richard. It's actually 3 decades, but I'm so thrilled you're not counting. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for that very, very warm applause. At the outset, I have to say how truly thrilled, humbled and honoured I am by the privilege of being asked to deliver this year's Andrew Olle Memorial Lecture, a journalist still remembered, perhaps now more than ever, deeply admired for his integrity, cool professionalism, and one of the best raised eyebrows in the business. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone here, Annette, when I say that it is testament to the impact Andrew had on journalism and a community fortunate enough to be the beneficiary of his work that nigh on 2 decades since he was taken from you and from us, that we are still here in such great numbers to honour his legacy. I was lucky enough to get to know Andrew towards the end of his all too brief 48 years, and as a result, I confess to the uncomfortable feeling that if Andrew himself had been invited to deliver a lecture such as this, I suspect he would have very graciously declined, so humble a man was he. But when I discovered I was the first female journalist to be so invited since Jana Wendt back in 1997, it was a hard one to knock back. And yes, for those of you who are doing the maths, that's 2 female journalists in 16 years. Still, I suppose that's better than double the representation women are currently enjoying in our federal cabinet. So, Mark Scott, thank you, Annette, Nina, Nick and Sam, and to the Olle Media Lecture Board for this enormous honour. And thank you also to our Federal Treasurer, Joe Hockey, for still honouring us with your presence, even though you knew I was going to make that jibe about the lack of women in Cabinet. Never fear, Joe, there's more to come. Now, back in 1997, when Jana gave this lecture, I was in the audience. It was powerful. But as the whole media world has transformed itself in the interim at warp speed, it feels like a lifetime ago. In 1997, the Saturday paper edition of the Sydney Morning Herald was selling a robust 408,000 copies, compared to just over half that now, and the proverbial rivers of gold were still flowing. ABC News 24 didn't yet exist. The Bulletin still had 11 years to run. Nene King was the most powerful person in Australian publishing. Blue Heelers was the #1 show on TV. John Laws was the king of Australian radio. Stuart Littlemore was still striking fear as the host of Media Watch. OneTel was the hottest telco in the country. TV wunderkind Adam Boland was still a kind in high school. And social media was a bunch of journos at Friday night drinks at the pub across the road from work. In 1997, most of us in this room didn't have an email address, had never been on the internet. There was no Facebook, no smartphones or iPads, no Google, no texting, no Wikipedia. And we were still a decade away from the first tweet. How far we've come. 16 years ago, could we have ever imagined that this new media and these new platforms would enter the fray so quickly, flourish so rampantly, and have such an impact on our profession, making news gatherings so much more layered, immediate, and, depending on your view, dynamic, blushingly populistic, or, for many, simply dangerous. For as we know, we are all members of a once rock-solid profession in full-blown transition. as this rising tide of new media swirls around us, sweeping away much of the landscape we once knew, and too often taking cherished colleagues with it. I'm sad to note that since Mark Colvin delivered the 2012 Olle Lecture, the MEAA reports that more than 1,000 jobs for Australian journalists have been lost, with the numbers going from around 9,000 to just under 8,000 around the country. Now, with the collapse of the funding model, our once exclusive fourth estate has been under siege by millions of enthusiasts bearing iPhones and laptops. So now, while traditional media struggles, contracts, reinvents and tries desperately to survive, everyone, it seems, can now join us in the sandpit and play journalist. Who needs membership in the mighty Journalists Union when all you need is a smartphone, an opinion that can be tightly compressed, and the desire to experience the sweet, sticky rush of a 140-character tweet gone viral? I have no doubt that every journalist in the room could right now name the story that carried their first byline, or the time they nailed their first live piece to camera, got their first radio news bulletin to air, or the letter they received when a story they'd covered touched someone. It's a hard-fought thrill and one to cherish forever. You've communicated, you've told a story, you've made a yarn live and breathe. It's the moment that you realise that someone, somewhere, noticed the work that you'd done. It's the moment you realised you had an audience, however large or small, for your work. Now, that same kind of rough rush can be experienced by a 16-year-old fanboy with an iPhone crying, "Leave Britney alone!" in his bathroom. Bang, almost 50 million hits on YouTube. How do we as journalists compete with that? And should we even have to try? As David Marr famously said in his first meeting with the new editor of The Guardian, Catherine Viner, "There's one thing you need to know about me: I don't tweet." Catherine was undaunted and employed him anyway. And I dare say in the current climate, David may be the only one afforded such latitude, except for maybe Andrew Denton. How good would it be if Andrew Denton tweeted? Now, our bosses encourage the rest of us to engage in social media. Lord knows my former executive producer at Today, Tom Malone, took years to convince me I should get on board. In the end, he stopped trying to convince me and used a much better method. He ordered me to do it. Even then, I was far from convinced. Too self-indulgent, too intrusive, I thought. Even the name of this new form of communication seemed to be its own running gag on those who chose to partake. And I know Richard Glover felt exactly the same. Indeed, in those early days of working out who I would follow on Twitter, I checked out Richard's feed. Richard, it turned out, was one of Twitter's early adopters. But a closer look revealed a single tweet in about April of 2008 about what he'd had for breakfast that day. And then nothing. For 4 years. Presumably you did have another meal in the interim, did you, Richard? Now, to me, Richard's silence said it all. Twitter was a place for the truly self-obsessed and narcissistic. Kim Kardashian and Kevin Rudd. Now, Richard, along with me and 218 million others, adds his tweets to the 500 million sent around the world every day, not all of which are from Kevin Rudd. There are now tweets from popes and queens and even tweets from space. We can watch whole romances bloom and wither and bloom again, courtesy of Warnie and Liz. And I'm sure that I speak for many in the room when I say that despite our initial disdain for social media, journalism's new dirty little secret is a certain quiet obsession we all have with how many Twitter followers other journalists have and why on earth they have more than you. But enough about Carl's 150,000 followers. And I notice you've been working it hard lately, Mike Carlton. 15,000, almost 150,000, 15,000 followers added in just the last 4 months. As Seal would say, well done. And by the way, Mike, I haven't seen Piers Ackerman here tonight, but Please, no more throwing wine over him like you did back at the dinner in 2002 from memory. Now, certainly the industry is taking social media seriously, and media bosses tell me that a journalist's social media following is now a real factor when it comes to hiring and promotion. It's measurable, it's of tangible benefit and value to an employer, and it's being viewed by media bosses as your own personal circulation number. In fact, I know of at least one news boss who will, in the next few months, have a real-time ticker giving him daily updates on the social media following of each of his journalists, from retweets to Facebook shares to Instagram likes to that white-knuckle ride of that widget that tells you how many people are reading your article right now. He believes that this will be the ultimate test. How many readers is each journalist driving to the paper's website and the toll gates at that all-important paywall? But inherent with all of this journalistically is this. Social media brings a need for speed. And obviously that speed, the greatest weapon social media has going for it, can be the enemy of accuracy, the greatest thing traditional journalism has going for it. If I can take you back to April 15th of this year and the Boston bombings, the event, I believe, where social media and traditional media collided. On the day the news broke, social media was at its instantaneous best. Within moments, the first images were online. As news gatherers, this was gold, and authorities went on to use many of those images to help identify their suspects. But that's also when social media became problematic and traditional media came to the fore. With so much confusion and conjecture flooding social media, an avalanche of misinformation went viral. Fact-checking, accuracy and official confirmations, the bread and butter of our training as journalists, became casualties of the adrenaline rush to be the first with the news, even if, in some cases, it turned out to be wrong. That day, we were also reminded of the schism in views of what now constitutes news, because on April 15th, there were two hashtags vying for the #1 spot on Twitter worldwide: Boston bombings and Kardashian divorce. What happened next, though, was encouraging. Despite the instant gratification of social media's hashtag feeds, people turned and returned to traditional trusted media in their droves, the TV and radio news bulletins and news websites in search of the truth, the measured, fact-checked, considered truth. There was no competition. Traditional media on all platforms was the preferred option. And as a news gathering source, we were reminded that these new media channels should only ever be seen as one aspect of how we gather information in order to tell a story. But despite this engulfing tide of social media, the rock of solid journalism is still there, still very much needed. And in a world of swirling communications on so many different platforms, the eternal values of traditional journalism have never been more crucial in establishing what the truth of a matter is and putting it on the public record. But with all of this pressure to engage in social media, to share of ourselves, our thoughts, our behind-the-scenes moments, increase our followers, add our 2 cents worth to the day's hottest hashtag and the constant daily churn and burn of the 24-hour news cycle, are we unwittingly heading towards a generation of journalists who will lose the art of listening, of being interested in other people's stories? Is social media, in fact, the natural-born enemy of why we became journalists in the first place? My own entry into journalism is probably typical of many in this room. When I got my first job, I couldn't believe my luck. And after more than 3 decades in this profession, and despite tonight's honour, I can honestly say, and despite this room, of course, boasting so many titans of this media age, I can honestly say that I still think of myself as a magazine junkie kid from the suburbs who lucked out big time after answering a 3-line ad in the Women and Girls employment section of the Sydney Morning Herald. And I can tell you, compared to the plethora of positions being offered up to the men and boys each day back then, that women and girls section didn't exactly trouble the printer for too much ink or column inches. But there, buried under the letter D, without fanfare, in unremarkable 7-point type, it read, "Dolly magazine is looking for a secretary, stroke editorial assistant, stroke Girl Friday, who is prepared to do absolutely anything. Phone Kathy on 699 3622. I was prepared to do absolutely anything, and I did phone Kathy. 3 days later, I caught the all-station 7:48 train from Campbelltown to Central, wearing the brand new frock I'd had on lay-by for 6 months, and nervously walked the 3 blocks to the Fairfax Magazine building in Chippendale, which we actually drove past tonight, with my pretty ordinary HSC pass in one hand, my certificate in advanced secretarial studies in the other, and my thumping, some these days might say bleeding heart, in my mouth. One interview and a demonstration of my Sale of the Century-like knowledge of every pop star countdown it ever featured later, I had the job, my dream job, at Dolly, the very magazine I had spent all of my teenage years reading. I was going to be sitting in the same office as journalists, real journalists, with notepads, deadlines and typewriters. Heck, some of them were even electric. The typewriters, not the journalists. Watching, learning, questioning, and no doubt breathing in enough second-hand smoke to kill a brown dog. Trying to work it all out, how this magical thing called a magazine was actually put together. From the Bay City Rollers to tan-through bikinis and every shade of Q-Tex nail polish in between. This was a magazine that, back in the early 80s, was read by 1 in every 2 Australian teenage girls, an audience totally and uniquely devoted to it, a readership that today's media proprietors and advertisers could only dream of, and one I felt an incredible responsibility towards. One of my first jobs at Dolly was choosing the Dolly Doctor letters. And as every woman in the room, and yes, every man with a sister, knows, it was the most well-thumbed page in the magazine. But questions about surprising places hair can grow aside, girls got to start somewhere. I can't help but imagine how different that whole first job in the media scenario would be today. Would that job at Dolly even be advertised? No need. Now all it takes is a single mention on Mamma Mia, 10,000 likes on the Dolly Facebook page, a Lee Sales retweet and bang. Aspiring editorial assistants for as far as the eye can see, all with their own blog, a LinkedIn page, Tumblr site and a perfectly produced show reel with 300 YouTube views, all packaged up with a selfie in the latest ASOS frock, ready to strike a pose for the Sunday Telly social pages. Remember the days when a one-page CV and a couple of fake references was all that was required? We've all done it. Now, just for the heck of it, I want to show you a couple of pictures from 2 years after I started at Dolly, when I'd become the magazine's freshly minted 21-year-old editor. I've got to say, it's actually really hard for me to look at these pictures, and not just because of that yellow novelty jumper. It's hard because I'm immediately reminded of the sheer terror I felt at being handed such a huge responsibility as the editorship of Dolly at such a ludicrously young age. I also have to wonder if in today's image-conscious, camera-ready, Facebook-fabulous world, if that raw, still far from formed young woman with fear in her eyes and just a pure passion for working in magazines would even get that same break today. Who knows? What I do know is that someone back then thought I was worth taking a chance on. And for the first time in my career, I knew the incredible power that comes from someone believing in you, when perhaps you're not yet believing in yourself. That said, certainly not everyone was believing in me at that particular point. Dolly being a part of the Fairfax group of magazines, I knew for sure and for certain that there would be fully trained up journalists all over the building with decades of experience under their belts, thinking, who the hell does this trumped up little typist think she is? I was too. Although I did get one call of congratulations when I became the editor from a Fairfax board member who rang to wish me a hell of a lot more luck with the teenage population of Australia than he was currently having with his 15-year-old daughter. Well, I've got one of those daughters now, and let me tell you, some things never change. Though she's 16 now and she's here with my family tonight, and I can tell you she's absolutely fabulous. But while the challenges of parenting haven't changed much, a great deal of journalism has, because today, so often it seems, the old combo of talent, a love of words and the power to communicate powerfully are not always enough. Because today's media landscape, particularly for women, is one now so focused on the glossy and the glamorous, it often eclipses and undermines everything else. And it is everywhere. And I kid you not, even in preparing for tonight's lecture, the most common question I was asked was not what are you going to say, but what are you going to wear? And when you're a woman doing breakfast TV, you quickly learn the sad truth that what you wear can sometimes generate a bigger reaction than even any political interview you ever do. I absolutely love co-hosting the Today Show, and I do feel truly privileged to right now be part of such a great team who are over there in great numbers, and I thank them for that. Yes, even over the last month, when we have somehow entered that disconcerting place that I know many of you in the room have visited, where you somehow go from reporting the news to being it. But breakfast TV is an endlessly intense and diverse journalistic experience, and it does come at a cost. Yes, the alarm does go off with a number starting with 3, and the hours do wreak havoc with normal family life. As I mentioned, my 3 children are here, and for 7 years now, I haven't been there in the morning before they head off to school. And even Pete would admit signing excursion notes and finding missing socks is not exactly his forte. And I have been known to put a load of washing on in the dark at an ungodly hour as I head out the door to work. I know I should leave it to my husband, but do you have any idea how hard it is to get red bandana dye out of a load of whites? Now, as a woman in the media, it has long saddened me that while we delight in covering public issues of overt sexism, possibly the hottest topic in media over the last 12 months, the media itself can be every bit as guilty of treating women entirely differently to men. And in terms of our audience, the cliche is so often true. It is women who can turn out to be women's harshest critics. Take this email that arrived in the Today Show inbox from a viewer called Angela in March of this year. Who the heck is Lisa's stylist? Whoever she is has Lisa in some shocking clothes. Today's outfit is particularly jarring and awful. Just my 2 cents worth. Get some style, Angela. Now, I know I am far from being above criticism. Good sense should tell me to leave that sort of semi-anonymous stuff alone. But some mornings, dear Angela. Thanks for all of your Get Some Style feedback. Please feel free to send me a list of all the outfits you don't like out of the 200 or so that I come up with each year, and I'll see what I can do. Just so I can prepare, are we just talking about the outfits I wear for the Today Show, or the ones I come up with to wear for red carpet and charity events as well? You'll need to be very specific because that's a lot of outfits to remember. Please include suggested colours, sleeve lengths, skirt shapes, your preference for prints, fabric, weights, jackets versus blouse, etc. Of course, Angela, given that I'm a journalist and not a supermodel, it's important that anything I wear allows me to feel comfortable for 3.5 hours on set, or perhaps outside when we're on location. Oh, and I'm a married mother of 3, so nothing too revealing, thanks. And nothing I wear can ever clash with what Georgie is wearing. And I have a larger bust, so nothing tight, thanks. Oh, and I'm not very tall. Did I mention I'm not a model? So please take that into consideration as well. And finally, I must never clash with Carl's ties or suits or the couch. Look forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Lisa. I think I did a head-in because I never did hear from poor Angela again. Now, even our most esteemed female media guests aren't immune from criticism, not even when she is the Australian of the Year. Take this recent email from viewer Steve. I don't think you guys should allow Miss Ida Buttrose on the show. She has so much to answer for. Before she started writing all that stuff in her magazine all those years ago, women were happy. They didn't need to vote or have a licence. They didn't even know what an organism is. Now they expect it every time. Steve. And at the risk of overdoing it, I can't resist delving into the mailbag one last time and sharing this email that popped up in our inbox one recent morning when Georgie Gardner and I were hosting the show. Hello, producer. I'm totally fed up with the combination of Lisa and Georgie. They're shocking together and it's like listening to a chorus of cats. Please replace Carl when he's on assignment with a male partner for Georgie or Lisa. In fact, Lisa's interviews are very biased and I think she should just stay at home with her husband and that stupid red turban he wears on his head. No doubt that's where she gets her Tony Abbott interview questions from. Joanne. You know what's coming next, don't you? I couldn't help myself. Dear Joanne, really sorry you feel that way. What's disappointing, though, is that you think a grown woman can't come up with her own questions in an interview with the opposition leader, and that for some reason she needs to ask her husband to write them for her. Then again, I note that you have sent this email from your husband's email address. So maybe that's the way things roll in your house. Sincerely, Lisa. Well, Joanne did write back to me. And what you may be surprised to learn is that Joanne told me she's a former executive at UNIFEM, the organisation charged with the care, protection and promotion of women. She then mentioned that she was running a new business, and would I mind terribly given I was now a member of her sisterhood, giving it a plug on the Today Show. And I've been receiving press releases from her ever since. I despaired. How could a woman whose job it once was to change the culture of discrimination towards women feel okay about being so anti-women? Was it the semi-anonymous nature of flicking off an email to someone she'd never met that somehow, in her mind, made that okay? And why are women so often the targets of vitriol? And why in so many areas of Australian life are the rules of engagement still so different for women? When I saw just a few months ago that Australia's most trusted publication, the Women's Weekly, ran a cover story, Why Women Hate Women, I despaired because I recognised the syndrome. I don't believe that Australian women do hate women, but I despair when I see the same media that decries sexism and misogyny itself engaging in it with such uncaring ease. I despair that every time a female journalist is profiled in the press, her age is usually mentioned by the second paragraph, as if it's a measure of her sexual currency and just how long it will be before it expires. And yet, does anyone here know or even care how old Kerry O'Brien, Koshy, Tony Jones, Hugh Riminton, Ray Martin, Peter Overton or Laurie Oakes are? They're all brilliant at what they do, and the rule of thumb is that more experienced they are, the better they are at their jobs. So why, so often, doesn't that same measure apply to women? I despair whenever I hear the words post-baby body, accompanied by images of yet another celebrity who in 4 amazing weeks has managed to immediately wipe away any physical trace of evidence that she had ever been pregnant in the first place. And we're meant to aspire to that? I despair when I see another celebrities with anorexia gossip cover, complete with before and after paparazzi shots, calculated to show each one of them at their sad, tortured worst. It's pure voyeurism and ridicule, masquerading as concern. I despair when I see the young female radio DJ disappear from sight and unable to work after being caught up in a prank call to a London hospital that saw a troubled nurse take her own life. Meanwhile, her male co-host gets promoted and is given a major industry award by his employer as Top Jock of the Year. Turns out shit happens. I despair when our federal cabinet of 2013 has just 1 woman to 19 men. And then we women are told, even by other women, we must shoulder the burden of blame for this lack of female parliamentary presence due to our lack of merit. If only we were more talented, we're told, we might get half a chance of a look-in. I despair that so many young girls are growing up held hostage via social media to the views others have of them, long before they even know who they are themselves. I despair of the Instagram culture where young girls learn to take off as much clothing as possible in order to generate the greatest number of likes from an audience too often made up of strangers. This is now the screwed-up arbiter of a girl's self-esteem. I despair when a retired male journalist called Jeff Barker complains that he can no longer watch the TV news because young female journalists who are simply and competently getting on with their job are apparently too attractive for him to concentrate. Wake up, Jeff! And as a former magazine editor, please allow me to speak on something I feel most passionately about of all. I truly despair every time Fashion Week rolls around and another parade of tragically skinny young women make their way down the catwalk. Every year. The designers blame the agents insist the girls are healthy, while the fashion editors hand the model yet another size 6 garment to wear in photo shoots because, and I'm quoting fashion editors here, it's the only size the designer samples come in. Meanwhile, former Vogue editor Kirsty Clements admits that she's seen models eat tissues to suppress their appetite so they can stay skinny enough to fit the clothes they're required to wear in magazines. But I say no more excuses. No more pointing the finger at others as the cause of the problem. We need a simple rule, a compact. We, the editors of women's magazines of Australia, feel that our duty is to present healthy images to the young women of Australia, and this far outweighs any other consideration. Therefore, we will not display in our magazines clothes that arrive in a size 6. If not our generation, then whose? If not now, when? Because so many young Australian girls are struggling. And this barrage of impossible, unattainable images is a big part of why. It is no decent solution to our broader journalistic problems of how to retain eyeballs and circulations. It is a betrayal, to use an old-fashioned term, of our duty of care. So to the rising generation of female journalists in the room and those watching at home, and our 2 wonderful recipients of this year's scholarship, allow me to say that I appreciate you have come into the media at a difficult time. I know the frustration and concern many of you feel because a lot of you have told me. The wonderful thing is, and I want to end on a positive note, there are actually a lot of bright, shining stars for us all to steer by. I encourage you to look, as I regularly do, to the women I most admire in this wonderful profession in which we find ourselves. From Lee Sales, who had the unenviable task of stepping into Kerry O'Brien's shoes and now totally owns 7:30, to the easy charm of Liz Hayes and her extraordinary ability to draw out unexpected admissions from her interview subjects. Sarah Ferguson, whose every TV exposé is caused to lean in so as not to miss a word. Georgie Gardner's obvious compassion for every single news bulletin she delivers. Emma Alberici and Jenny Brockie's sheer professionalism and depth of experience. Sam Armitage and Mel Doyle's extreme grace under professional pressure. Annabelle Crabb's quirky individuality matched only by her sharp-as-a-tack political acumen. Tracy Grimshaw, my predecessor at Today, who picks up another bloody Walkley nomination every time she sits down for one of her signature interviews. The wonderfully incisive writings of Julia Baird and Wendy Squires. Kate McClymont's forensic research and take no prisoners bravery. Deborah Thomas's seamless capacity to work across so many media platforms. Fran Kelly's warmth and piercing intellect as a broadcaster. Mia Friedman's trailblazing bravery and inspirational innovation in the online world. Morag Ramsey's capacity as a producer to make the complex comprehensible. Jennifer Burns' infectious enthusiasm for every single subject she turns her hand to. And the gentle grace and warm wisdom the wonderful Carolyn Jones brings on a Monday night as this tribal elder and enduring pioneer of female journalists in this country introduces another episode of Australian Story. And of course, Ita Buttrose, organisms and all.